Good morning, welcome back to Morning Live for the Sports Desk. My name is Vasiwe Ngcobo. Now, yesterday we started off the conversation speaking about the former director of cricket, Graeme Smith, who has now been cleared of all charges against him after Cricket South Africa's social justice and nation-building hearings made some damning findings against the former Proteas skipper. Now, next up is the Proteas coach, Mark Boucher, who's supposed to go through a similar process as Smith in arbitration. To continue with the conversation that we started yesterday morning, we have re-invited Cricket South Africa's chairperson, Mr. Lawson Naidoo. Good morning, Lawson. Once again, thank you so much for making time for us this morning.
Thank you, Vasiwe. Good to be back.
Thanks, Lawson. So yesterday we were quite rushed for time and we didn't get to some of the questions we wanted to get into a little deeper. Just in terms of Graeme Smith, we just wanted to perhaps get more clarity on the evidence that was before the two independent arbitrators and just eventually them getting to their ruling.
Yeah, well, I think it's wise to recap on what I said yesterday, is that this arbitration was a result of the findings in the Social Justice Nation Building report that was presented to the Board of Cricket South Africa last year by Advocate in SABC, in which there were tentative findings of racial discrimination on the part of Mr. Smith. And it was the view of the board that a further exhaustive process should be conducted in order to clarify the allegations that were made and against which tentative findings had been made, and that it would be in the best interest of the game of cricket, as well as in the best interest of Mr. Smith himself, in order to resolve these issues once and for all. If we had not done so, the cloud and the stigma of those allegations would have hovered over Mr. Smith for the rest of his career as an administrator or as a commentator. So it was in the interest of all parties that these matters be put to the test and be resolved once and for all. What Cricket South Africa then did was to enter into an arbitration agreement with Mr. Smith in terms of his contract as an independent contractor to Cricket South Africa. And we put those allegations to a panel of arbitrators led by Advocate Manichi, Senior Counsel. The evidence that was presented was in the form of testimony from Mr. Tami Solukile, who was one of the complainants insofar as the SJN process was concerned, relating to his exclusion from the test team, as well as affidavits and statements from the then convener of selectors, Mr. Andrew Hudson, Mr. Linda Zondi, who was then a selector, as well as a statement from Mr. Puletsi Museki, the then acting CEO and now Chief Executive Officer of Cricket South Africa. So all of that information was placed before the arbitrators, and on the basis of that and the evidence of Mr. Smith, the cross-examination of witnesses, the arbitrators came to their conclusion.
And Mr. Lawson, I hear you mentioning that, of course, you wanted some finality also for Mr. Smith, but I would assume that from a CSA perspective, it is also to give those who feel like racist acts were directed at them, to also give them some closure from those experiences.
Well, indeed, and I think, we must not forget that an important part of the process of the SJN was to provide a platform for people who felt that they were unfairly treated in the past to come forward and to share their experiences. And I think that was a very important part of that process. It really enabled those people to come forward and unburden themselves. And I think it must also be pointed out that many of those who did so came there and said that they did not come forward in order for any personal gain or benefit, but in order to share their experiences so that we could learn from them and that future generations of black cricketers would not have to endure the experiences that they did.
Lawson, perhaps maybe just getting some clarity. I know that we have said that he has been cleared of all these allegations, but from a CSA perspective, what then happens now to ensure that the current crop of players never have to go through this type of process where they have to try and prove that I feel as though someone was racially discriminating against me?
Well, I think 2 points, Siwa. Firstly, I think many of these issues that we were dealing with were historic ones. And I think there have been significant changes in Cricket South Africa over the years, where we have a far more inclusive setup within the whole of the cricketing ecosystem in South Africa. Yes, there are still problems that beset the game. But what we've done as a board is, in terms of engaging with the findings and recommendations of the SJN report, has been to agree to create more effective grievance and complaints mechanisms so that anybody who feels unfairly treated can bring those complaints forward, and they will be dealt with speedily and resolved, unlike Mr. Solokile, who had to wait 10 years to have his opportunity to air his grievances. The fact that his grievances were not substantiated in the end is not really the point. Is that there need to be grievance mechanisms, they need to be speedily resolved, and that is something that this board is committed to doing. And it's something that we have incorporated as part of our strategic plan for the next 5 years to ensure that cricket becomes a more accessible, inclusive game based on the principles of excellence that will allow cricket players to fulfill their potential nationally as well as globally, both women and men cricketers.
Okay, Lawson, I would have liked to go a little bit deeper in terms of just looking at you referring to some of these incidents being historic. I mean, we look at some of those charges against Graeme involving the former CEO, but I do want us to get to the point on Mark Boucher and perhaps you giving us an update on where the process is with him now and whether he will undergo a similar process to what we've seen with Graeme Smith and what the current status is.
Well, the process in relation to Mark Boucher is slightly different. That Mr. Boucher is an employee of Cricket South Africa, so he's facing disciplinary action in terms of the labour relations legislation. And that hearing is scheduled to get underway on the 16th of next month of May, and will proceed on that basis. There have been preliminary pre-inquiry hearings and the like, but the main hearing will get underway next month. And in the same way as we've made the outcome of the Graeme Smith arbitration public, the outcome of the Mark Boucher hearing or disciplinary inquiry will similarly be made public.
And Mr. Lawson, just finally, in terms of Mark Boucher, is there some sort of succession plan in place to the extent that what the outcome of this disciplinary inquiry is unfavourable to him?
I think it would be premature to speculate on that. We need to go through this process, and we will, we will deal with the outcome of that process when it happens. I don't think it's wise to speculate on anything further at this point.
And just finally, Lawson, in terms of, we know that Cricket South Africa has always had their position in terms of a suspension, a precautionary suspension of any of the Cricket South Africa employees who of course, there were like tentative findings against them during this SJN hearings. Is your position in terms of those precautionary suspensions still the same?
Well, we took legal advice in relation to the issue of precautionary suspensions relating to Graeme Smith and Mark Boucher, and were advised by two independent lawyers that there were insufficient grounds to implement a precautionary suspension given the conditions imposed on that by labour legislation. And so we did consider it, but we were advised that it was not the right thing to do, so we refrained from doing so.
Okay, Mr. Lawson, thank you so much for your time this morning. And just as I conclude with you, I do know that there were some reports regarding Mark Boucher where his lawyers were saying that they don't have access to some of the statements which were made by Mr. Enoch Nkwe. Has that issue now been resolved? Has he been given full access to that?
My understanding is that that application was made and it was denied by the chairperson of the inquiry, Advocate Terry Mutau.
Okay, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
That is, of course, Lawson Naidoo, the chairperson of Cricket South Africa, just talking about Graeme Smith being cleared of all the charges that were raised against him and where the tentative findings were made during the SJN hearings. And also speaking about Mark Boucher, we do know that damning findings were also made against him during the SJN process. And Lawson Naidoo, of course, telling us that the disciplinary hearing or disciplinary inquiry in terms of Mark Boucher will get underway from the 16th of May because his position is different to Graeme Smith. He is, of course, an employee of Cricket South Africa, so they will take that in terms of having a disciplinary inquiry for him.